Everyone in the classroom thought it was just another normal lesson, until the prince casually rewrote mathematics itself. In just a few seconds, he created something that didn't exist before. And what shocked everyone the most was how effortless it looked. When he shows it to the teacher, it is immediately dismissed as impossible, but the moment the instructor takes a closer look, he freezes because it actually works. Not only does it work, it is something entirely new, a discovery no one has ever seen before. Shocked, the teacher rushes out to report it, while Cecil remains completely unfazed. As for him, understanding everything instantly is normal, and that is exactly why the entire class feels boring. At the royal palace, a beautiful girl suddenly approaches Cecil and declares, without hesitation, that she is a villainess destined to steal him away from the heroine and leave him heartbroken in the end, leaving Cecil completely confused as her words make no sense to him at all. Later, at the royal capital, Cecil formally introduces himself as the crown prince of Alfasta as he meets his fiancée Bertia for the first time. But as she continues speaking with complete confidence, it becomes obvious that not only Cecil, but even everyone around her has no idea what she is talking about. Despite the strange situation, Cecil remains calm and composed, suggesting they move to a more proper setting and talk over tea. And although Bertia reacts oddly at first, she eventually agrees, marking the beginning of a very unusual and unpredictable conversation. Sitting together over tea, Cecil calmly introduces his personal butler, Zeno, while Bertia quietly stares at him with suspicion, prompting Cecil to question if something is wrong, only for her to suddenly point out that he seems far too composed for someone his age and even wonders if he might be a reincarnation. Cecil is briefly confused by the idea but naturally explains that this is simply how royalty is taught to behave, though behind him, Zeno internally disagrees, thinking that no ordinary child could act this detached and philosophical, while Cecil subtly notices that his butler's true thoughts are almost spilling out despite his silence. Turning back to Bertia, Cecil calmly asks her to explain what she meant earlier, and while casually eating sweets, she confidently begins revealing everything, insisting that he must understand the truth so he can one day reject her properly. She then shocks him by claiming she remembers her past life in a place called Japan, where stories were experienced through moving images like novels, known as otone games, and according to her, this very world is one of those stories. Because of that, she already knows the entire future, explaining that Cecil is destined to fall in love with another noble girl known as the Maiden of Destiny, while she herself will become a jealous villainess who torments the heroine, leading to their engagement being broken and her family falling into ruin. Despite describing her own downfall, she shows no hesitation, proudly declaring that by being defeated, she will allow them to find happiness, and even if her fate is destruction, she intends to embrace it beautifully as a perfect flower of evil. Hearing all of this, Cecil realizes that for the first time in his life, he cannot fully understand what someone is saying, yet instead of rejecting it, he calmly concludes that whether Bertia is imagining things or truly predicting the future does not matter, as she is simply trying to become the person she believes she is meant to be, and as long as it does not interfere with her role as a future queen, he has no reason to stop her. Curious, he asks what she meant by becoming a first-rate flower of evil, and with complete confidence, Bertia describes it as someone strong, noble, and beautiful, a woman who walks toward her own destruction without hesitation. Cecil quietly repeats those words, slightly intrigued, but Bertia quickly becomes flustered, insisting he misunderstood, as she was never meant to be someone remarkable, and in the original story, she was simply a character who never truly stood a chance, even down to her own appearance. Hearing her explanation, Cecil quietly remarks that it sounds like a rather sad fate and wonders if she is truly fine with it, but Bertia immediately denies it, explaining that everything she described was only the version of herself from that story, while she herself is different, someone who once lived a timid life and hid within her own shell, yet still admired him and now genuinely wishes for his happiness above all else. Determined, she declares that she will change herself and become an honest and righteous flower of evil, leaving Cecil completely confused by the contradiction, and before he can even respond, she suddenly announces that she will improve herself and return, only to run off at full speed, leaving him behind in silence. Watching her disappear, Cecil is left wondering what he just experienced, while Zeno asks what he plans to do next, and after a brief moment of thought, Cecil calmly admits that although she lacks the manners expected of someone who would stand beside royalty and much of what she says remains impossible to understand, that unpredictability is exactly what makes her so interesting. Deciding that for now he will simply observe her and, if necessary, guide her onto the proper path. Zeno notices the subtle change in his attitude, pointing out that he seems to be enjoying himself, and Cecil quietly agrees, explaining that for someone like him, who can achieve anything on the first attempt, the world has always felt dull and colorless, leaving him without any real sense of accomplishment. But now, for the first time, something feels different, and as he recalls Bertia's chaotic nature, he finds himself hoping that she will not betray his expectations. 1 year later, while studying alone, Cecil receives a report from a messenger as Zeno informs him that Bertia has shut herself away inside her home for an entire year, something that would normally be concerning. But Cecil calmly explains that he has been keeping track of her condition, and that she is actually in very good spirits, leaving Zeno confused as to why she would isolate herself like that, to which Cecil simply responds that everything will make sense once they see her in person, hinting that her reappearance will be sooner than expected. A few days later, Cecil visits Bertia along with Zeno, where she excitedly greets him after a long time and even jokes that he might not recognize her, only to immediately introduce herself as his fiancée, while Cecil quietly observes that her appearance has changed significantly, confirming what he had heard in the reports. As she continues speaking with her usual energy, she nervously asks if he really failed to recognize her. But before the moment can settle, her father suddenly scolds her harshly for her improper attitude toward the crown prince. However, Cecil calmly brushes it aside, describing her behavior as childlike and even adorable, which completely catches Bertia off guard, leaving her blushing as she shyly asks him to repeat what he just said. Her father quickly interrupts, warning her not to be fooled by Cecil's appearance, pointing out that his eyes never seem to smile and that he lacks the warmth to truly dote on something cute, bluntly calling him cold before awkwardly trying to compensate by calling her adorable himself, leaving Cecil quietly wondering if the man realizes he sounded even ruder than Bertia. Later, while they're having tea, the scarf around Bertia suddenly moves, and she panics, calling out to it, instantly exposing that it's actually alive. Cecil, completely unfazed, admits he already suspected it, while Bertia hurriedly apologizes and explains that ever since she took it in, it refuses to leave her side, so she tried to disguise it as a scarf, which clearly didn't work. Instead of questioning it, Cecil decides to ignore it on purpose, finding the situation more entertaining than concerning, and casually shifts the moment by inviting her to enjoy the sweets before the tea gets cold, which she happily agrees to, as if nothing unusual just happened. Just as she's about to eat, her maid coughs, reminding her she's on a diet, but the moment Cecil mentions it's low sugar, she gives in instantly, completely losing herself in the taste, making him quietly realize she's moving further away from the noble villainess she keeps talking about. So he simply shifts the conversation to tomorrow. Bertia immediately agrees, confidently declaring that at tomorrow's party she'll act as a perfect villainess and properly stand by his side. But instead of feeling reassured, Cecil can't help but feel slightly uneasy, as if her confidence doesn't quite match reality. Though he still calmly tells her that everything about her being a villainess and remembering a past life should remain strictly between the two of them. Bertia questions why, and Cecil calmly explains that high society is unpredictable, where even a single mistake can be used against you, so a true villainess should never expose herself so easily, which she immediately takes the wrong way, confidently concluding that a first-rate villain works in secret while a third-rate one talks too much, proudly declaring that unlike her past self, she will become a truly noble and beautiful flower of evil. Cecil says he's glad she understands, though he quietly feels she misunderstood, then mentions that tomorrow is his 11th birthday and that he's happy she'll be there. But hearing this suddenly shocks Bertia as she realizes her own age, and in that moment, her expression completely changes as she begins to panic, revealing that according to the future she knows, her mother is going to die from an epidemic that will spread in the coming summer, just before her next birthday. Cecil questions it, and Bertia explains that a deadly disease will spread, one that takes time to cure, and the only treatment requires a rare herb called Luna leaf, which will run out, leading to countless deaths, including her mother despite all efforts to save her. Realizing this happens a year later, Cecil calmly points out that preparing in advance should be enough to change the outcome, but Bertia hesitates, worried about altering the future, forcing him to ask what matters more, the scenario or her mother. And when she chooses her mother without hesitation, he steps forward, gently comforting her and reminding her that as her fiancé, she doesn't have to face this alone, and that they can find a solution together. 1 year later, Bertia suddenly bursts out, calling Cecil awful, only to immediately realize her mistake and try to correct herself, while Cecil calmly apologizes instead, noticing her frustration. And she finally vents that it's already her 10th birthday and despite trying to prepare for the epidemic, all he ever wrote back was that everything would be fine, leaving her completely lost on what she was supposed to do. Cecil quietly signals Zeno, clearing the room before gently apologizing, admitting he didn't realize how distressed she was, but calmly reassures her that everything truly is fine, which only confuses Bertia more as she explains how she desperately tried to gather the Luna leaf yet failed, and even stranger, the disease never spread and her mother remained perfectly healthy, leaving her unable to understand what's happening, until Cecil finally reveals that the epidemic did occur, exactly as she said, it was simply contained before it could spread. Bertia is stunned to hear that the disease actually spread, only for Cecil to calmly reveal that he used her information to identify it in advance and created the medicine beforehand, ensuring patients were treated the moment it appeared, leaving her completely shocked and demanding an explanation, while Cecil, oddly unfazed by her reaction, simply asks her to calm down and suggests they take a walk outside before explaining everything properly. Walking together, Cecil calmly takes her back to a year ago, explaining that right after their conversation, he immediately began preparing, starting with researching the Luna leaf in the palace library, then using that knowledge to successfully cultivate it himself, surprising everyone as it grew into something extraordinary. And once he secured the herb, He used the details Bertia provided along with knowledge from medical experts to identify the disease in advance. After figuring everything out, Cecil quietly creates the antidote in advance, though he admits there's no way to test it without actual patients, so instead of acting directly, he decides to guide a skilled doctor toward the solution, pretending it's just curiosity while discussing diseases, new strains, and eventually steering the conversation toward the Luana leaf. However, things don't go as smoothly as expected, and despite his efforts, the doctor fails to notice the obvious connection, leaving Cecil unusually frustrated as he's forced to wait, while Zeno finds the situation oddly amusing. Still trusting the doctor's ability, Cecil continues patiently until months later, the doctor finally reaches the conclusion on his own, exactly as Cecil intended, even if it took far longer than expected. Back in the present, Cecil calmly explains that once the first patient appeared, the doctor handled everything using the treatment he had been guided toward, successfully containing the disease, though inwardly he admits he was still surprised it actually happened, as he hadn't fully believed Bertia's story, and reflects that the difficulty in guiding the doctor and the anxiety he caused her were likely due to his own habit of understanding things too quickly while skipping proper explanations. Bertia, still overwhelmed, asks why he would go that far, and Cecil simply answers that he couldn't ignore his fiancée when she was clearly anxious, but she struggles to believe it, pointing out that an 11-year-old shouldn't be capable of all this, while Cecil calmly explains that as Crown Prince he has access to the palace library and the ability to call upon experts, making it sound completely normal, even as Zeno silently disagrees, knowing that what Cecil did was far beyond what any normal child could achieve, something Cecil subtly seems to notice without saying it out loud. Bertia, still confused, wonders if things can really work out this conveniently and jokingly calls him the Android Prince. But Cecil brushes it off, telling her not to worry about the details since her mother is safe and the damage was minimized, which is all that matters, and she quickly accepts that, deciding it's for the best, while Cecil lightly notes that she's already given up trying to understand before shifting the moment by mentioning he has a personal gift for her. Excited, Bertia reacts immediately, and Cecil presents a blue necklace he made himself, which she admires, only for him to casually reveal that it's actually a universal antidote, leaving her completely shocked as he explains that he created it using knowledge he discovered while researching in the palace library. He explains that while searching the palace library, he stumbled upon a hidden room and used the knowledge he found there to create it, intending it as a protective charm since her life could be at risk in the future. Then gently places the necklace on her, telling her it suits her perfectly, leaving Bertia blushing as she thanks him and suddenly swears to repay him by fully embracing her role and becoming a proper villainess. Completely fired up, she even starts planning to turn her own father into a villain, which Cecil immediately shuts down, knowing it would cause serious problems, but she continues anyway, determined to ensure his happy ending with the heroine, while Cecil quietly realizes she isn't really listening to him at all, though instead of stopping her, he simply accepts it, finding her chaotic determination far more entertaining than anything else. 1 year later, Cecil meets Bertia's father at the royal palace and immediately notices how exhausted he looks, only to find out the reason is Bertia herself, who has spent the entire year trying to turn her own father into a proper villain, even going as far as preparing detailed notes on crimes that are surprisingly realistic, leaving Cecil quietly impressed while the Marquis looks completely drained from hearing about evil plans day and night. Trying to calm him down, Cecil casually suggests it might just be a phase, but that only backfires when the Marquis points out she should be targeting Cecil instead, which somehow turns into him realizing she might just love her father too much, while also hinting that Cecil himself might already seem evil enough, something even Zeno silently agrees with. As the topic shifts to their upcoming debut in high society, the Marquis feels both emotional and worried, while Cecil calmly reassures him that he'll support Bertia, though deep down, he admits that if things get interesting he might just sit back and watch it unfold. Finally, the day of their social debut arrives, and while Bertia is fully prepared for her big, villainous moment, Cecil casually walks in and calls her beautiful, instantly throwing her off balance before she forces herself back into character, determined not to lose focus. But the moment they step into the hall, everything flips, because instead of creating chaos, Bertia handles the situation perfectly, greeting everyone with elegance and confidence, leaving the nobles impressed and Cecil quietly amused, realizing that despite all her talk about becoming evil, she's naturally acting like the ideal noble instead. While everything seems to be going smoothly, a viscount suddenly calls out to Bertia and immediately gets a little too comfortable, grabbing her hand and openly flirting, which doesn't sit well with Cecil at all, as he quietly notices how casually the man is touching his fiancée and starts questioning what kind of connection they have. Just as Bertia is about to say something, Cecil steps in without hesitation, pulls her away, and calmly excuses them, claiming she isn't feeling well, leaving her completely confused as she's suddenly dragged out of the situation before she can even react. Inside a quiet room, Bertia questions why she was suddenly pulled away, but Cecil keeps it direct and asks her to answer honestly, whether the information she used for her so-called villain manual came from the Viscount, and instead of denying it, she admits it without hesitation, only becoming embarrassed that he had gone through her notes, while Cecil, already expecting that answer, calmly asks her to explain exactly how she obtained that information. Hesitantly, Bertia explains that when the Viscount visited her father, she remembered he was one of the people who was supposed to lead him down a villainous path, so she deliberately got close to him, doing everything she could to gain his trust, and eventually managed to get him to openly talk about criminal activities, believing she was successfully learning how to become a proper villain. At that point, Cecil's tone shifts completely as he tells her, without softening it, that the Viscount isn't some harmless noble but a man known for preying on young girls, making it clear how serious the situation actually is, and then, without raising his voice, he asks her directly the only thing that matters, whether he ever laid a hand on her. As she thinks back, something clicks, and that friendly image of the Viscount suddenly twists into something far more disturbing in her mind, causing her to break down as she realizes how dangerous the situation actually was. While Cecil quietly understands that from the outside, the man would have seemed like nothing more than a kind, harmless adult, and that she could never have seen through it on her own. Cecil pulls her in and quietly reassures her he'll handle it, but the moment his expression hardens, it's clear he's already decided someone's going to pay for this. Then he calmly asks if she's been in contact with anyone else, and Bertia, still treating this like part of her plan, casually mentions a few names, which makes him immediately step in and tell her to stop putting herself in danger. His tone calm but firm this time, because he knows she's taking this far too lightly. Bertia quickly agrees, saying she doesn't want to go through something like that again, but then immediately follows it up by deciding she'll just be more careful next time, completely missing the point, while Cecil internally questions why she won't just stop altogether, only to calmly tell her that even getting involved is dangerous. Yet she stays determined, insisting she'll handle it for his sake, making it obvious she isn't listening at all. And at that point, Cecil just accepts it, quietly shifting his focus as he realizes this mess might actually be the perfect chance to clean out the corruption in the kingdom. After that, Cecil calls in the Marquis, who walks in already prepared to apologize for whatever chaos his daughter caused this time. But Cecil calmly redirects the situation and has him sit, then casually drops that he's been hearing some very questionable rumors about certain nobles, and more importantly, that they've been trying to approach him, which instantly wipes that worried father look off his face and replaces it with pure confusion. Cecil then casually mentions that one of those nobles has already gotten close to Bertia and behaved in a way that definitely crossed the line, and just like that, the Marquis goes from confused to ready to start a war in seconds, but Cecil calmly steps in and tones it down, assuring him it didn't go too far while also asking him not to bring it up with her, which leaves the Marquis stuck in that painful situation where he's furious, but also forced to stay quiet about it. Cecil, already several steps ahead, keeps Bertia out of the situation and calmly proposes handling everything quietly, asking the Marquis to assist, which briefly confuses him, but the moment Cecil explains he can use their approach to gather evidence, it suddenly makes perfect sense, and just like that, the Marquis switches from worried father to fully committed execution mode, ready to deal with them personally. Walking through the palace, Cecil notes that everything is finally set in motion, though he also realizes that once he moves into the academy dorms, keeping control over things will become much harder, and sure enough, 6 months later at Home Academy, he's already bored out of his mind, since everything being taught feels like revision to him, and just as he starts thinking life would be slightly more interesting if Bertia were around, she suddenly appears out of nowhere, sprinting toward him. At full speed, instantly turning his peaceful boredom into a situation he clearly did not sign up for. He turns around, trying to stay composed, and calmly asks what brought her all the way there, but Bertia, completely panicked, immediately drops the most dangerous sentence possible, saying they have a baby on the way, which instantly shuts down Cecil's brain for a moment while she continues spiraling about the future. And within seconds the nearby students start turning it into gossip, praising him like he just achieved something unbelievable, while Cecil is internally trying to process how his life went from peaceful boredom to this level of chaos, firmly denying every assumption in his head, as even Zeno is barely holding back his laughter at the situation. Bertia, still in full panic mode, keeps talking like this is some life-ending scandal, only making things sound worse with every sentence, while Cecil is internally begging her to stop before the rumors get even wilder. So he finally steps in and calmly asks the simplest question possible, who exactly is pregnant with whose child, and after all that chaos, she casually reveals it's her mother expecting a child with her father, something completely normal, instantly turning the entire situation into one perfectly unnecessary misunderstanding. With everyone already watching, Bertia suddenly realizes how badly that sounded and panics, blurting out that it's not her and that nothing has even happened between them, which somehow makes it even more awkward, while Cecil calmly steps in, pulls her away, and handles it like nothing happened, then casually looks back at the crowd and makes it very clear, without saying much, that any rumors would be a very bad idea, and just like that, everyone silently agrees to forget what they just heard. Cecil calmly offers to have a carriage prepared and escort her back so she can explain everything properly, but Bertia, still recovering from that public disaster, awkwardly insists she already came on her own, as if that helps, while Cecil politely refuses to let that happen, making it clear he's not about to send his fiancée away like that, only for her to admit, completely seriously, that if she stays any longer, she might not survive the embarrassment. Cecil then casually raises the stakes by teasing her with the idea of a kiss once they're alone, which instantly overwhelms Bertia as she turns bright red and runs off at full speed, leaving him standing there, clearly entertained by how easily she lost composure, while Zeno silently notes that this was definitely not an accident, and Cecil, completely unbothered, decides he rather likes calling her Bertia, as if that little reaction just made his day a lot more interesting. 6 months later, Cecil visits the No-Chase estate, where the Marquis greets him as usual, while Bertia is busy holding her little brother, looking unusually quiet for once, and when Cecil steps into her room, he starts noticing a pattern. Everything is blue and yellow, the same color she always wears, which makes him pause for a second and wonder if it's just coincidence, or something a little too specific, before immediately deciding not to think too deeply about it, even though that small detail leaves him with a feeling he's not entirely comfortable admitting. Bertia suddenly apologizes about her little brother, which completely catches Cecil off guard, as he calmly asks her to raise her head and explain what she's even apologizing for, since from his perspective, nothing about this situation makes sense yet. After hearing her out, Cecil calmly sums it up, explaining that in her version of events, the family was supposed to have no heir and adopt a talented boy who would later rise as one of his aides, but thanks to her mother surviving, that entire plan has quietly fallen apart, and while Cecil sees this as everything going perfectly fine, Bertia treats it like they've accidentally deleted an important character from the story. Cecil quietly considers that if this boy is truly talented, it would be a waste to leave him out, but before he can go further, Bertia starts explaining that at least this avoids one route where that boy ends up with the heroine, which immediately makes Cecil pause, since up until now she claimed he was the one destined for her, and when he points that out, she casually drops the fact that there are actually multiple possible outcomes depending on the heroine's choices, something she somehow forgot to mention earlier, leaving Cecil internally questioning how such a critical detail was skipped, before calmly concluding that if that's the case, there's no reason their engagement has to be broken at all. Bertia suddenly shuts that idea down, saying it can't happen, almost revealing something important before stopping herself mid-sentence, which immediately catches Cecil's attention, though she quickly brushes it off and insists on pushing her original plan, making it obvious she's hiding something, while Cecil, choosing not to press it for now, shifts the conversation and asks about these so-called candidates, and Bertia starts listing them out like a prepared roster: Lord Valt Nokens, Lord Charles Lionel, Lord Nelt Crumb, and even the second prince, Sean Turquoine Alfasta. Hearing her list those names so precisely, Cecil realizes there's no way she could know this on her own, which makes him take her so-called past life memories far more seriously. While Bertia continues explaining that according to her, events will naturally pull all these people toward the heroine, but now that things have changed, she's worried that same force might redirect itself in a dangerous way, possibly bringing harm to her younger brother, revealing that behind all her chaotic plans, she's actually been quietly afraid this entire time. Cecil finally understands that all of this comes down to her worrying about her brother, which, in a very Bertia way, somehow turned into another complicated scenario problem. So he simplifies it instantly, pointing out that if the issue is just about that boy needing to attend the academy and become a candidate, then it's not really a problem at all, catching Bertia off guard as she hesitantly agrees, while Cecil, already confident, casually tells her to leave everything to him, like he's just been handed another problem he's already solved. At Courtgain's workplace, he's quietly handling paperwork while his boss loudly proves he has zero people skills, scolding everyone in the worst way possible until the staff just give up and walk off, and after surviving that daily chaos, Courtgain returns home expecting peace, only to find Cecil casually waiting inside like this is a completely normal visit, instantly sending him into panic mode. But Cecil keeps things calm, brushes off the formalities, and smoothly shifts into questioning him about the local lord, using the excuse of hearing complaints from the people. Courtgain is clearly surprised that Cecil came personally, but Cecil smoothly plays it off as royal responsibility, while internally admitting he's technically telling the truth, just not the whole truth, then casually asks for his opinion on the local lord, and instead of complaints, Courtgain gives a surprisingly balanced answer, explaining that the man is actually logical and capable, just terrible at communicating, turning good advice into insults, like scolding farmers for harvesting too early when he was actually trying to help them earn more, and in the end, it becomes clear the real problem isn't the Lord's intentions. It's the way he delivers them. Cecil realizes Courtgain's answer lines up perfectly with what he already knows and, without making a big deal out of it, casually tells him he passes, which completely confuses him, only for Cecil to immediately follow it up with a life-changing offer, asking him to be adopted into a noble house and work as his informant, saying it as calmly as if he's assigning paperwork, even though the job comes with real danger. But for Courtgain, who had already settled for an ordinary life, this sounds less like a risk and more like a miracle, and in the next moment he's already on one knee, pledging his loyalty like his entire story just got rewritten on the spot. Back at the palace, Cecil calmly explains that Courtgain will attend the academy as planned, which immediately reassures Bertia as she happily notes that her father is getting along better than ever with those suspicious nobles, completely unaware he's actually spying on them, while Cecil quietly keeps that detail to himself, and just when everything seems perfectly handled, Bertia casually brings up avoiding a reverse harem, which makes Cecil pause for a second before asking what she even means, only to hear an explanation that turns romance into complete chaos, and he shuts it down instantly, pointing out that in reality, that kind of situation wouldn't be love, it would be a disaster for the entire kingdom. Bertia keeps insisting that even then, love could force someone to accept such a situation, presenting it like a valid outcome, but Cecil shuts it down immediately, making it clear no one would be foolish enough to risk the kingdom over something like that. Still trying to justify it, Bertia brings up the idea of charm-like influence, even though she believes such magic doesn't exist, which is when Cecil calmly explains that while it isn't magic, things like light spirits can create a sense of euphoria, and if misused, they could influence people in a way that feels almost unnatural. Bertia agrees at first, then suddenly freezes as something clicks, realizing what he just implied and asking if spirits actually exist, which makes Cecil calmly confirm it and casually drop that both of them are already contracted to one, completely breaking her understanding before asking where she even found Kuro, and as she explains how she met her in the forest and named her after getting injured, Cecil connects it instantly and reveals that this wasn't some coincidence at all. She unknowingly formed a contract with a high-level darkness spirit, explaining it like it's basic knowledge while Bertia is still trying to catch up. Bertia is completely stunned as the realization hits her, but before she can even process it, Cecil casually adds that Zeno is his contracted spirit as well, which only makes things worse as her brain completely gives up trying to keep up, while Cecil, completely unfazed, has Zeno bring out a stack of books and calmly tells her to study properly, like this is just normal homework, leaving Bertia overwhelmed and barely functioning, while Cecil, already thinking ahead, concludes that if someone were to rely on something like spirit-based influence to affect him, they'd need far more than that to even stand a chance. After completely overwhelming Bertia with the truth about spirits, Cecil moves on like nothing happened, and time quickly passes as the stage shifts to Hom Academy, where he now stands as the student council president, delivering a flawless welcome speech to the new students, but just as everything feels formal and composed, he casually drops one small detail that changes the mood instantly, revealing that his fiancée has finally enrolled as well, making it clear that even before she shows up, the attention is already on her. In the council room, the conversation naturally turns to Bertia, with Charles noting how she drew more attention than anyone during the ceremony. While Cecil responds calmly, and the others begin sharing their impressions, Sean speaks with genuine admiration, calling her beautiful and even mentioning she will be his elder sister-in-law, expressing his wish to befriend her. Nelt admits that her sharp and decisive presence makes him slightly uneasy, and Valt, in contrast, focuses on her physique, with striking detail, prompting Charles to question him and assume that someone like Bertia should embody the image of a refined noble lady. Listening to all this, Cecil quietly reflects that Valt's observation might not be entirely wrong, while Charles continues to hold onto the image of Bertia as a perfect noble lady, a thought Cecil finds rather amusing, especially considering what's yet to be revealed. The conversation then shifts to Court Gain, as Charles asks about his connection to the Noches family, but Court Gain responds bluntly, explaining that being from the lowest branch, he never had the chance to meet her, and quickly shuts the conversation down to return to his work, leaving Charles commenting on his cold attitude, while Cecil simply notes that despite his diligence, he can be a bit too rigid at times. Zeno then reminds Cecil it's time, and as he prepares to leave, Charles quickly catches on and asks if he's going to see Bertia, which Cecil openly confirms, even referring to her as his adorable fiancée, something that completely surprises everyone, since this is coming from the same person who usually shows little interest in others, but Cecil simply clarifies that he does take interest, just in people he finds entertaining, which only makes Charles more curious, leading him to suggest they all go together, clearly eager to meet her, while Sean immediately joins in, and with that, what was meant to be a simple visit turns into a group outing as Cecil agrees without much resistance. Walking through the academy hallway, they pass a girl chasing after her familiar, someone who clearly stands out, but Cecil doesn't pause for it and instead quietly calls Court Gain over, giving him a brief instruction before continuing, and soon they arrive where Bertia is having tea with her friends, only for Cecil to casually greet her, completely catching her off guard, while as he observes the group, his attention subtly shifts to Kuro, noticing how she's taken a form suitable for staying by Bertia's side, even if no one else seems to realize what she truly is. Caught completely off guard, Bertia questions why he's here so early and even points out the entire student council arriving with him, nearly slipping into her usual scenario thinking, but Cecil calmly corrects her and reminds her this is exactly the time they agreed on, leaving her trying to recover, until Joanna steps in smoothly, greeting him with confidence and asking to speak, while Cecil acknowledges her just as naturally, recognizing her as Joanna Kurtzwarren, a duke's daughter and his second cousin, clearly someone who isn't intimidated by the situation at all. Joanna steps in at just the wrong moment and casually tells Cecil how Bertia had been waiting for him, getting restless and even a little down when he didn't show up sooner, completely exposing her, and Bertia immediately tries to deny it, only to end up admitting it halfway, making it even more awkward, so she quickly tries to recover by proudly saying she's made plenty of friends, but then calls them minions to keep up her villain act, which completely ruins the moment as Cecil calmly points out that they're clearly just her friends, leaving her flustered while trying to fix what she just said. Joanna then calmly clears things up, saying there's no need to worry because they're all part of a group dedicated to admiring Bertia, essentially treating it like a fan club, explaining that their goal is simply to watch over her as she grows, since she's surprisingly popular with everyone, which completely catches Bertia off guard as she had no idea, while Cecil quietly realizes she's the only one unaware of just how much attention she draws, and explains that simply being around Bertia feels comforting. Cynthia adds that in a society filled with hidden intentions, her honesty stands out and brings a sense of ease, and Silica goes a step further, saying she wants to watch over her so she continues growing just as genuine as she is now, which makes their admiration sound far more sincere than playful, leaving Bertia flustered as she tries to brush it off, even pointing out that Silica sounds more like a mother than a friend. Zeno quietly signals the moment and Cecil takes it without hesitation, calling Bertia aside before presenting her with a pot of blue roses to mark her enrollment. But instead of reacting normally, Bertia immediately starts connecting it to her imagined scenario, treating it like a special event reward, questioning the unusual color, recognizing how rare blue roses are and even wondering why it's a potted plant, turning a simple gift into something far more significant in her mind. Cecil simply explains that he chose that color because she likes it and even made the roses himself, making it clear this is the only one of its kind, which immediately raises the value of the gift far beyond what Bertia expected, leaving her hesitant to accept something so rare. But when he insists, she tries to respond sincerely and ends up comparing the color to his eyes without thinking, only to panic and correct herself instantly. While behind them, Charles and Nelt quietly observe and begin to realize that Bertia is not quite what they initially assumed. While walking together that evening, Bertia admits she had been uneasy since her scenario keeps changing, but feels reassured believing the meet-cute event went as expected, which prompts Cecil to ask what that even means, and as she explains the encounter he was supposed to have, Cecil calmly describes it from his perspective, saying the girl's behavior felt suspicious and inappropriate, and that he had already asked Courtgain to report her, completely overturning Bertia's expectations as she realizes the so-called heroine has been treated as a problem rather than someone special. After a brief pause, Bertia explains how it was supposed to happen, saying he should have taken a red rose meant for her and given it to that girl, calling it the meet-cute event, but Cecil calmly points out that nothing about that could happen since he gave her a potted plant instead, making the entire setup impossible from the start, and when she asks if he felt anything at all, he dismisses it without hesitation, saying someone far more unusual left a stronger impression on him, which makes Bertia realize the event has completely fallen apart, leaving her momentarily defeated. But after a second, she softens and admits that even so, she's still a little happy, and Cecil quietly accepts that without saying much. Later in the student council room, Joanna arrives right on time, completely at ease, and makes it clear that refusing an invitation from Cecil isn't exactly an option at this academy, before taking her seat like she already knows this won't be a casual chat. And when Cecil brings up seeing her at Bertia's tea party, she doesn't hesitate, admitting she was drawn to Bertia from the start, even pointing out how her oddly impressive guide to the royal capital ended up pulling more people into their group, which only reminds Cecil of that strange but effective talent of hers. And just as the conversation starts to feel relaxed, he smoothly shifts the tone, making it clear he didn't call her here just to talk. Joanna quickly realizes what he's getting at and brings up the society herself, and Cecil calmly acknowledges it, pointing out how large it's become before asking if there's anyone within it who could be a risk. But instead of answering directly, Joanna pushes back, hinting that he's already looked into it and calling it rather improper, which only makes Cecil conclude that she's far more sharp and calculating than Bertia, and without missing a beat, he flips the situation by bringing up her connection to Sean, catching her completely off guard and exposing the one thing she clearly didn't want used against her. That completely throws Joanna off, and she drops the polite act, openly calling him a black-hearted schemer, while Cecil casually fires back without missing a beat, turning it into a back and forth where she vents her frustration, even dragging Sean and Bertia into it, which only gives Cecil the perfect opening to tease her about being jealous, something she immediately denies but fails to convincingly hide, until Zeno steps in to remind him not to push too far, and just like that, Cecil smoothly ends the teasing and brings the conversation back on track, asking her to finally share what she knows about the potential threats. Joanna finally gives in and explains the group itself isn't the problem since she keeps everyone in line, but the real trouble comes from outside, nobles who've started getting irritated by how popular Bertia has become, and as Cecil looks through the list, one name immediately stands out, the same girl from the hallway, so this isn't just talk anymore. She then sums it up simply, some girls admire Cecil a little too much and others are upset because their own fiancés are paying attention to Bertia, turning it into pure jealousy with a direction, and while this should sound like a problem, Cecil treats it like things at the academy just became a lot more entertaining. Joanna immediately pushes back, unable to understand how he could see any of this as fun, pointing out that Bertia is the one at risk here. But Cecil remains calm and dismisses the concern, saying she's not alone and has people around her, especially Joanna, whose way of thinking he trusts enough to leave things in her hands, which completely throws her off as she wasn't expecting that kind of confidence. But after a brief moment, she composes herself and accepts it, deciding to take responsibility and protect Bertia properly, before excusing herself and leaving, while Cecil simply watches with quiet amusement. Left alone, Cecil quietly pieces everything together, realizing the real threat lies with Heroine and the influence of light-based abilities. And while he's already prepared Bertia by having her study Kuro's powers for protection, he also knows there's a limitation since those abilities can't be used openly, which leaves him considering his next move for a moment, before simply deciding to act, getting up and heading out to meet Bertia, intrigued since she rarely invites him without a reason. And as Zeno casually points out the obvious, that this probably means trouble, Cecil doesn't deny it at all, clearly more interested than concerned about whatever chaos might be waiting. As Cecil heads to the rose garden, he immediately notices Heroine resting under a tree right at the meeting spot, and instead of Bertia, it's the so-called heroine lying there like the scene has been perfectly arranged, which makes him realize what Bertia was trying to set up, and sure enough, she's hiding nearby with Kuro. Though Cecil spots her instantly and simply plays along, completely ignoring the obvious attempt, and while the heroine tries to get his attention with repeated coughing, he casually sits down, opens a book, and acts like none of it concerns him at all. Everything falls apart in the most ridiculous way when Bertia suddenly screams about a caterpillar on her head, instantly revealing where she was hiding, and Cecil just steps in like this was part of the plan all along, calmly removes it, and handles it like a minor inconvenience, even treating her sudden appearance as if it were perfectly timed, before lightly calling out her little scheme, which leaves her completely flustered trying to recover. While in the background, the heroine is still desperately trying to get noticed, and Cecil simply ignores all of it and moves things forward, as if none of this chaos was worth his attention in the first place. Bertia tries to say something but her brain just gives up mid-sentence, while behind them the heroine is practically performing for attention at this point. Yet Cecil acts like she's invisible and smoothly changes the entire situation, reminding Bertia she was the one who invited him and immediately tempting her with imported sweets, which works way too easily as her focus shifts in seconds, and before the main character of the scene can even get a single reaction, Cecil casually takes Bertia's hand and walks off with her like this was always the plan, leaving the heroine stuck there talking to herself while he mentally decides that whatever noise is coming from behind is simply not worth his time. While having tea, Bertia keeps sneaking looks at the clock like she's waiting for destiny to hit its mark, and the moment it does, she suddenly panics out of nowhere about forgetting something, rushing through the excuse so perfectly timed it feels less like memory and more like a scheduled event, making the whole performance painfully obvious even to Zeno. Yet Cecil doesn't question a single thing and just goes along with it, calmly asking which classroom he's supposed to head to while letting her dramatic setup play out. When Cecil goes to the classroom to retrieve the item, he finds the heroine already there, greeting him as if this meeting was perfectly timed, and before anything can settle, another student rushes in. Remembers she was supposed to lock the room, and hurriedly does so without checking, trapping them both inside, which the heroine treats like a convenient turn of events while Cecil immediately understands the situation, and as she continues, she confidently thanks him for a rose he never gave, speaking as if something meaningful already happened between them, while Cecil quietly notes how she's trying to force something that never existed into reality. Cecil's attention shifts to the bird, quickly recognizing it as a light spirit, while the heroine continues building the moment, introducing it and trying to make it seem like even the spirit has taken a liking to him. But before she can finish pushing the scene any further, Cecil simply cuts it off entirely and jumps out of the window, leaving everything she was trying to create unfinished. Shocked, the heroine is left calling out as Cecil simply walks off, calmly checking his gloves like that's his only concern, and then casually informs a nearby teacher that a student has been locked inside, treating the whole situation like a minor inconvenience. 1 year later, while having tea, Cecil reflects that it's been a full year since Bertia started her little schemes, and when she asks what happened with the heroine, he casually explains that nothing really happened at all, since they were never even properly introduced, meaning by the Academy's strict social rules, they're still complete strangers, where those of lower status cannot approach higher status without introduction, even if they've already met, though he notes she doesn't seem too interested in following those rules anyway. Bertia is thrown off, questioning why nothing worked even after guiding him through so many events, which makes Cecil realize that everything she's been doing was intentional, and with a quiet sigh, he explains he's deliberately keeping his distance from the heroine and asks her to simply watch over him, which Bertia immediately takes as part of some deeper plan, convinced he's acting for her sake, while Cecil calmly assures her he won't let his precious princess slip away, even as his thoughts show he means it in his own way. Bertia admits she may have misunderstood everything, and Cecil simply accepts it without making a big deal out of it. But as the moment settles, he finds himself reflecting on something he can't quite explain. Watching her try so hard to bring him together with Heroine is strangely amusing. Yet at the same time, it leaves him with an unfamiliar discomfort, a quiet tightness in his chest that goes beyond simple annoyance, something he doesn't understand yet but can't ignore either. Charles watches his elder brother casually ditch his own engagement meeting to walk off with another woman like it's just another afternoon, leaving him behind to deal with the consequences, and already convinced his brother is completely hopeless. He heads back only to run into Anne, one of the very candidates meant for that same irresponsible brother. But the moment she turns around, all logic quietly disappears, and despite knowing exactly who she is, Charles still walks up to introduce himself, stepping straight into trouble without even trying to avoid it. Back with Bertia, Cecil can't help but reflect on how she's basically spent the past year running a full-time matchmaking operation, trying to push him toward Heroine while also organizing his future aides like she's managing a royal project. And just when it seems like she might finally slow down, she suddenly declares she's going to become a cupid, which immediately tells him things are about to get even more complicated, so he just calmly asks what exactly she's planning this time. Already, bracing himself for whatever comes next. Bertia lights up the moment he asks, proudly explaining that she's been thinking non-stop about how to guarantee his future with the heroine, putting in so much effort that Cecil quietly feels it's completely unnecessary. But she keeps going, revealing her brilliant plan. Instead of pushing him directly, she'll pair up all the other candidates with perfect partners so they never even look at the heroine, essentially solving everything at once, which makes Cecil realize that by Cupid she really means full-time relationship manager. And without wasting a second, she already picks her first targets, Walt and Cynthia, an engaged pair who barely know each other, before confidently excusing herself to go fix their relationship like it's her next mission. Stepping outside, Bertia instantly shifts into full mission mode, ready to kick off her grand matchmaking plan. But things fall apart immediately when she runs into and greets her confidently, and gets an oddly uneasy response in return, and before she can even process it, and quickly excuses herself and walks away, leaving Bertia standing there as her perfect plan hits confusion in under 10 seconds. Next day at the stables, Bertia shows up ready to run her grand matchmaking operation like a perfectly planned event, only for the plan to start wobbling immediately when Cecil casually appears as well, completely unbothered and apparently invited. And before she can even process that, her attention shifts to Cynthia, who shows up in trousers, already breaking the image Bertia had in mind. And instead of explaining anything, Cynthia simply gets on a horse and rides with flawless skill, instantly proving that whatever fragile backstory Bertia was relying on has clearly not survived reality. Cynthia casually drops the fact that she's never been seriously ill, and just like that, Bertia's entire script starts collapsing. And before she can even process it, Cecil leans in and quietly reminds her that the epidemic ended early because of his medicine, which is basically him saying this is your own doing. And that's the exact moment Bertia realizes she sabotaged her own plan years in advance without even knowing it, because the whole setup depended on Cynthia being weak and inexperienced. And now, instead of a gentle riding lesson, she's watching a professional performance unfold with zero need for her involvement. With no lesson left to teach, the whole plan quietly turns into a ride for fun. And before Bertia can adjust, Walt and Cynthia are already bonding naturally, praising each other and escalating from a calm ride to testing speed, until it suddenly turns into a full race, leaving Bertia watching in disbelief as things spiral way beyond her control. And just when she thinks it can't get worse, Cecil decides to keep up, speeding forward as well, only to take what he casually calls a shortcut, which involves jumping across a broken path, instantly turning Bertia's romantic setup into a survival experience, while she holds on for dear life. Back at the stables, Walt and Cynthia are already enjoying the moment like everything went perfectly, laughing it off and even planning to ride together again, while Bertia, on the other hand, is still recovering from what just happened, clinging to Cecil like her soul hasn't fully returned yet. And when he asks if she's alright, she tries to act composed but can barely stand, while Cecil quietly reflects that he might have enjoyed her reaction a little more than he should have. Still barely standing, Bertia suddenly declares the mission a complete success as if nothing traumatic just happened, and Cecil simply goes along with it. But their attention shifts when they notice Charles nearby, casually walking with yet another unfamiliar woman. And while Cecil comments on it lightly, Bertia's reaction is very different, as she quietly watches him with an expression that doesn't go unnoticed. Next day at the academy, Charles bumps into and instantly notices she looks off. So he does what he always does, tries to fix the mood with his usual overconfident charm, acting like he can solve anything in seconds. But this time it doesn't work at all, because in calmly explains she's been told to decide her future regarding her engagement to his older brother, something serious enough that even his usual energy can't touch it. And just like that, the always easygoing Charles goes completely quiet, realizing this is one situation he can't joke his way out of. Right when the silence drags on, Bertia suddenly appears and calls him out for standing there doing nothing, completely breaking the moment and turning the pressure straight onto him, leaving Charles caught off guard. And not long after, he ends up venting everything to Cecil, practically begging him to do something about Bertia before she turns his life into a full-blown disaster. Cecil calmly asks what Bertia even did this time, and Charles immediately explodes, saying she exposed someone's feelings without permission, his feelings, right in front of and turning what he had been desperately trying to hide into something unavoidable. And as he keeps talking, it stops sounding like a complaint and starts sounding like a confession, admitting he tried to forget her by seeing other women but failed every single time, until it all spills out how deeply he cares, how much it hurts, and how frustrating it is to love someone he believes he can never have. Cecil quietly realizes that the usually carefree Charles has been hiding something far deeper all this time, but before he can step in, he notices the real problem, and Bertia are already standing behind him, hearing everything, and right on cue, Bertia doesn't hold back at all, calling him out and telling him to stop hesitating if he feels that strongly, which only pushes Charles further as he tries to justify himself, talking about status and what kind of life and deserves. But the moment he turns around, he freezes, realizing she heard every single word. Bertia doesn't slow down at all, brushing aside status and saying love matters more, even bluntly pointing out that Charles's brother isn't exactly the ideal partner. Then turns to Anne and lays out the choice in the most direct way possible, pushing both of them into a corner at once, which leaves Anne completely overwhelmed and Charles scrambling for an answer, until Cecil steps in at the right moment, cutting through the pressure and reminding them not to corner her like that, giving Anne the space to breathe while Charles quickly apologizes. Cecil then shifts the entire situation, calmly pointing out that while status does matter, it isn't fixed. If Charles earns a position as his personal aide, that gap disappears, but Charles hesitates, unsure if he can reach that level, only for Bertia to immediately push him forward, telling him to work for it instead of doubting himself. And with that, Cecil leaves the final step to him, making it clear that everything now depends on his resolve. Charles finally stops overthinking and just goes for it, stepping forward and dropping to one knee like he's reached the final boss of his own emotions, laying everything out with complete honesty and promising he'll become someone worthy of her, asking her to watch him grow instead of turning away now. And while Anne doesn't give a straight answer, she admits she understands the reality of noble life but can't ignore the part of her that wants something real, choosing to think about her future on her own terms, which is more than enough for Charles, who instantly regains his spirit and, with zero hesitation, declares he'll climb as high as it takes, even if that means becoming the Demon King's most loyal servant. Listening to all of it, Cecil can't help but wonder if the so-called Demon King Charles is talking about is actually him, while right beside him, Bertia proudly declares the entire situation a huge success, completely satisfied with how things turned out, and although Cecil agrees on the surface, he quietly notes that the way it all came together was far from subtle. Another day at the academy, Bertia runs into Sean, who looks genuinely happy, excitedly talking about some rare sweets like he just discovered treasure. But the moment Joanna casually steps into the conversation, his entire system crashes, confidence gone, composure gone, survival instincts activated, and before anyone can react, he awkwardly excuses himself and disappears at top speed. Bertia is completely baffled by Sean's behavior, unable to understand how he can run away from someone who might become his fiancée, while Joanna calmly brushes it off like it's nothing, which only makes Bertia more determined to fix things, already thinking of ways to bring them closer. And right in the middle of that, she overhears Silica scolding Nelt for skipping meals and forcing him to eat handmade sweets, and in that exact moment, Bertia's brain lights up like she just discovered the ultimate strategy, instantly deciding this is the perfect solution. Next thing you know, Bertia has already launched a full operation in the kitchen, proudly naming it like it's some grand military plan, with the goal of winning Sean over through handmade sweets, while Joanna, now fully dragged into this, is surprisingly grateful, and Bertia confidently explains that since Sean likes sweets, this is the perfect way to close the distance, even bringing in Silica as their instructor, who casually reveals she's been making creative sweets for Nelt by hiding vegetables inside them, which Bertia immediately praises as the power of love, while Silica instantly denies it, clearly flustered. Silica quickly brings things back on track and gets them started with simple cookies, but even while preparing ingredients, the conversation shifts, and she points out Sean's strange behavior, which Joanna admits has been getting worse, suggesting she may have been a little too forceful, though she brushes it off, and Silica offers a more honest take, saying that being too perfect can actually make someone hard to approach, since it creates pressure instead of comfort, even relating it to her own situation with Nelt, where the more she tries to be proper, the more distant he becomes. Joanna points out that Nelt is Silica's childhood friend, and that's when Silica opens up a little, explaining how he was always quiet and kept to himself, often left out while others played. So she was the one who stayed by his side and talked to him, and for a brief moment, she drifts into that memory, watching him alone and choosing to walk up to him anyway, until Bertia snaps her back to the present, leaving Silica slightly flustered as she quickly brushes it off and pushes them back to baking like nothing just happened. An hour later, the results are in, and while Silica delivers perfect cookies like a professional and Bertia somehow manages something edible, Joanna creates something that looks less like food and more like charcoal, leaving everyone questioning how things went so wrong. And even when they try to stay optimistic, one bite is enough to confirm it's not just the appearance. The taste is just as disastrous, which completely shocks Joanna as she realizes she's found the one thing she absolutely cannot do, while Bertia and Silica quietly accept that there's no arguing with that, but instead of letting her give up, they immediately encourage her to keep trying, turning this failure into the beginning of a very determined and slightly dangerous new hobby. Bringing a plate of sweets like it's something to be handled carefully, Zeno casually mentions Joanna has begun her full dedication to baking, and the moment Cecil realizes these are her homemade cookies, sent over because even she can't keep eating them, he already knows what he's dealing with, takes a bite anyway, pauses for a moment, and quietly accepts the reality. Several days later, Joanna approaches Sean and offers him a batch of cookies with calm confidence, asking him to try them on the spot, and Sean, slightly puzzled but willing to go along with it, takes a bite and, after a brief pause, gives a very careful and polite verdict, settling on calling them a little dry. Joanna suddenly panics and starts apologizing like she just committed a serious crime, admitting she made the cookies herself to impress him since he likes sweets, but they never seem to turn out right, and before the situation can get any more awkward, she tries to escape immediately, only for Sean to react for once and stop her before she disappears again. Cutting at the perfect moment, the scene jumps to the council room where everyone is technically working but mostly just suffering in silence, with Charles openly complaining about the heat, Valt confirming it's unusually bad, and Nelt looking like he hasn't slept in days, casually admitting he's been pulling all-nighters while also getting scolded through letters from home. And just when the room settles into collective misery, Bertia storms in with Silica like a burst of energy, cheerfully, announcing their arrival with snacks in hand, instantly turning the entire atmosphere upside down. Silica walks straight up to Nelt and starts fixing his mess like it's her personal mission, pointing out every scattered paper and wrinkle with full precision. But Nelt, already exhausted and irritated, finally snaps, cutting her off and lashing out far harder than the situation deserves, saying she's overbearing and should stay away, even questioning her place in his life, which instantly crosses the line, leaving the room tense as Cecil realizes he's gone too far, and Silica, unable to hold it in, quietly breaks down. Bertia immediately steps in and shuts him down, pointing out everything Silica has been doing for him, the small things he keeps taking for granted, and lays it all out so directly that even Nelt is forced to hear it, calling it what it clearly is, care that looks a lot like love, which only leaves Silica completely flustered as she tries to deny it and brush it off as just her personality, while Charles quietly relates to the situation without saying much. And before things get any more awkward, Silica pulls Bertia away in frustration, leaving behind a tense silence as Cecil apologizes on her behalf and Nelt, now calmer, just lets it pass. Later, in a quiet classroom after thoroughly scolding her, Silica calmly asks if Bertia finally understands a maiden's heart, and Bertia, still shaken, nods immediately without question, while Silica admits she may have gone too far herself, realizing they're no longer children and that she's been overly involved, and despite Bertia trying to object, Silica gently decides to step back and keep her distance from Nelt for a while. Next day in the council room, Nelt sits alone and realizes he spent the entire night thinking about Silica, and only now does it hit him how quiet everything feels without her. No tea, no gentle reminders, not even her voice, something he never noticed until it was gone, and as that emptiness sinks in, he ends up dozing off on the sofa, only to wake up covered with a blanket and instinctively call out her name, before realizing it's Charles instead, which makes things even clearer, and with Cecil pointing out that Silica always did this for him, Nelt finally understands how much she's been supporting him all along, leading him to quietly decide that this time, he needs to say it to her directly. Nelt rushes to the garden and finally calls out to Silica, but before he can even get a proper sentence out, she immediately apologizes like she's already decided everything is her fault and is ready to step away, which completely throws him off and forces him to panic-correct the situation, admitting he's the one who messed up and apologizing properly, finally realizing all the small things she's been doing for him all this time, and even though expressing feelings is clearly not his strong point, he pushes through anyway and awkwardly asks her to stay by his side, somehow turning that clumsy confession into something sincere enough that Silica smiles and accepts without hesitation. Watching from the side, Bertia looks like she just won a championship no one knew was happening, already jumping straight to the idea of throwing a massive celebration, while Cecil calmly steps in to remind her how her plans usually end, which instantly makes her switch tone and start lecturing about how delicate a maiden's heart is, and just as she regains her composure, she spots Sean and Joanna nearby actually getting along, which completely confuses her since, according to her own plan, this outcome was not supposed to exist at all. Cecil calmly explains that he spoke with Sean earlier, and it turns out Joanna's perfection had always made him feel a bit inferior, but after seeing her fail at something as simple as baking, he was finally able to see her as just a normal girl, which unexpectedly brought out his desire to support her, leaving Bertia surprised at how things turned out, while Cecil casually calls it a lucky outcome and even gives her some credit, which immediately satisfies her as she agrees to hold back on a grand celebration, settling instead for a quiet congratulations. Cecil can't help but admit to himself that Bertia's idea of playing Cupid looked less like a plan and more like pure chaos running on confidence. Yet somehow it still worked out, which is honestly the most concerning part, but just as everything seems to wrap up nicely, there's a subtle shift because while Bertia is busy celebrating her success, somewhere nearby the so-called heroine is quietly losing her patience, watching everything fall apart and wondering how the entire story managed to go this off track without her even noticing. Late evening, a quiet classroom turns into a mini fan club as a couple of students flip through Bertia's Guide to the Capital, clearly enjoying it, until Heroine slides into the conversation and casually drops a rumor that Bertia didn't even make the book herself, claiming it was all done by her attendants, and before anyone can process that, she adds another layer, saying Bertia even bullies her out of jealousy, apparently threatened by her so-called beauty and popularity, which sounds dramatic enough to grab attention, but also just questionable enough to make you wonder how any of that actually makes sense. Meanwhile in the council room, Cecil is reviewing the timeline Bertia had laid out, noting that this should be the point where Heroine starts openly targeting her with rumors and false accusations, setting up the classic rivalry. But something feels off since none of it is unfolding as expected, and just as he's about to think deeper into it, a knock cuts through his thoughts as Courtgain enters with formal reports, bringing everything back to business. While going through the report, Cecil briefly notes the upcoming shift to high school, leaving the middle school student council under Courtgain's management, everything running smoothly as expected, until Courtgain suddenly pauses and brings up a request so out of place it immediately feels suspicious, asking if Bertia can call him Dear Brother Cour, and Cecil shuts it down instantly without hesitation, before calmly asking the obvious question, already certain who started this nonsense. Courtgain admits it's been happening almost every day, describing how Bertia keeps asking with full enthusiasm, only to look genuinely disappointed every time he refuses, making it strangely difficult to keep rejecting her, before quickly correcting himself and assuring Cecil he'll continue to refuse no matter what, and Cecil calmly agrees, but as the conversation settles, he finds something oddly off. They're talking about Bertia as usual. Yet for some reason, it's not amusing at all this time. Right then, the other council members walk in, casually greeting each other as Courtgain makes a quick exit, leaving the room to settle back into its usual routine, until Cecil suddenly notices something unusual on Charles, an earpiece, which immediately catches his attention as he points out how out of character it looks on him. Charles casually waves it off, saying it's not just him. Vault and Nelt have the same earpiece too, all courtesy of Bertia, and then, completely unaware of the danger he's stepping into, he asks the one question that should never have been asked, why Cecil doesn't have one, and just like that, the room temperature drops without warning, as something quietly shifts inside Cecil. Not loud, not explosive, just enough to make everyone feel it, while Charles instantly realizes he may have triggered something he absolutely shouldn't have, and Cecil, still perfectly calm on the surface, slowly processes the feeling, concluding with almost clinical precision that this isn't anger. Just a very clear case of discontent, with a strong hint of displeasure. In a quiet lounge over tea, Cecil casually brings up how Bertia has been persistently trying to get Courtgain to accept being called her dear brother, and she openly confirms it, explaining that since things aren't like the game, she's trying to secure that position herself to block his connection with the heroine. While Cecil quietly notes the irony, she's busy interfering everywhere else, yet still trying to push him toward the heroine at the same time. And as if that wasn't enough, Bertia casually adds that she's always wanted a sibling in her previous life, turning her chaotic plan into something oddly personal. Cecil instantly volunteers himself for the role way too smoothly, and for a moment Bertia almost accepts, then reality hits and she refuses, reminding him he's her fiancé, not someone she can downgrade into a brother, which actually throws him off for a second, but only for a second because he immediately switches tactics and offers a nickname instead, clearly not losing this round, then casually tells her to say it like this is already decided. Bertia tries to avoid it, saying calling him Prince Cecil is enough, but Cecil doesn't let it go and waits, forcing her to finish what she started, and after building up the courage, she finally manages to call him Cecil, which earns her an immediate head pat that completely throws her off balance, and before she can recover, he smoothly changes the topic and points out she hasn't given him something everyone else received, leaving her confused and flustered as she tries to explain it away. But Cecil calmly shuts that down too, making it clear he wants it, and at this point, it's less of a question and more of a decision. Before she can even react properly, Cecil casually takes the chain she's wearing and examines it like it already belongs to him, while Bertia panics and tries to get it back. But he's already noticed the details, the matching colors, the meaning behind it, something far more thoughtful than she probably meant to reveal, and then he calmly brings up the real point, how she gave everyone protective earrings to block Heronia's charm magic, while leaving him out of it, which Bertia quickly tries to justify, saying he doesn't need protection, only for Cecil to turn that logic around instantly, asking if she's fine with him becoming a puppet, and that alone is enough to make her panic, while he smoothly concludes that if he's going to stay in control of himself, then he'll be keeping it, making the decision sound completely reasonable while leaving her no way to argue back. Bertia gives in but still tries to warn him about the design like that's the real problem here, and Cecil immediately shuts that down, saying he likes it and casually asks her to try it on, which somehow turns into him stepping closer and fixing it for her himself, leaving her too stunned to even react properly, and just when she thinks that's the end of it, Cecil quietly signals Zeno, who adds a bit of magic to it, instantly triggering Kuros' reaction and shocking Bertia, while Cecil calmly explains it away as nothing serious, just a little spell to make sure the earring never falls off, turning a simple accessory into something way more permanent than she ever intended. Bertia finally realizes what just happened and immediately panics, pointing out that matching earrings basically scream couple to anyone with eyes, but Cecil just leans into it, calling it a pair bound by destiny like that somehow solves everything, while Bertia is busy worrying about the heroine going completely off-route again, only for Cecil to casually dismiss that too, then smoothly switches to using a nickname at the worst possible timing, completely throwing her off balance, and before she can recover or argue properly, he wraps things up on his own terms and walks away, leaving her desperately calling after him to remove the earring, while he ignores everything, clearly enjoying her reactions far more than the actual situation. Out of nowhere, A lady rushes in with a royal letter, and the moment Cecil reads it, his calm expression shifts just enough to say this is definitely not optional. His father has decided he's going abroad for 4 months. Just like that, no discussion, and before he can even process it, he's already in a neighboring country being given a very enthusiastic tour by a duke who proudly shows off their brewery like it's the crown jewel of the nation, while casually bringing up rising alcohol prices. And the complaints coming from Cecil's country, trying to justify it as a necessary adjustment, all wrapped in polite words but clearly testing the waters, as if this is just a friendly conversation and not a carefully disguised negotiation. Cecil casually lays out the whole pricing trick like it's basic common sense. Hook people with cheap alcohol, then raise the price once they're addicted, and the Duke instantly freezes like he's just been exposed. But Cecil smoothly plays it off, acting like it's just admiration, then casually adds that his own country is already brewing some very good alcohol too, basically turning a friendly tour into a quiet warning without even trying. The Duke quickly recovers, nods a bit too fast, and rushes the tour forward like nothing just happened, while Cecil follows quietly, already aware this isn't some study trip. He's been sent here to keep things in check, so he's been gathering information and nudging negotiations in his favor the whole time, and honestly, it's all going so smoothly that he's starting to get bored. Late that night, under the moonlight, Cecil stands quietly with a letter in hand, and despite everything happening around him, the only thing he actually looks forward to now are Bertia's letters and the reports about her, and as he reads her cheerful update, casually mentioning how the heroine is still adored by everyone, the mood feels almost peaceful, until he asks for the real report, and the tone immediately shifts, revealing that in his absence, Bertia's situation has worsened, with Heroine setting up one incident after another, small but calculated, turning everyday things into traps and spreading trouble without ever getting directly involved, slowly turning the academy into a place where tension is building on both sides. Cecil realizes that no matter how composed Bertia acts, she has to know she's being targeted, and part of him can't help thinking it would be easier if she just came to him instead of handling everything alone. But even then, something feels off because Heroine has always been careful, never doing anything directly that would make her look like the villain. Yet this time the actions are way too obvious, almost sloppy, which only makes it more suspicious, leaving Cecil wondering if relying on reports alone is starting to miss something important. A week later, Cecil returns and Bertia greets him with the same bright energy as if nothing has gone wrong at all, which already feels suspicious, and as they sit down for tea, he brings up the reports he received, but she dismisses everything without hesitation, insisting things are going well because she's progressing as a villainess, even defending the one causing all the trouble. And when Cecil offers to step in as her fiancé, she rejects it immediately, somehow making him the only person not allowed to fix a problem that clearly exists. Bertia proudly doubles down, declaring she'll become a perfect villainess on her own and rely on no one, even going as far as planning everything out so that once she wins, Cecil can step in and comfort the heroine instead, like she's organizing his love life for him, which only makes Cecil pause, because none of it makes sense. She's protecting the very person hurting her while pushing him away at the same time, and when he questions it, she casually downplays her place in his life. But that's where he finally cuts in and stops her, making it clear that no matter how she tries to frame it, she is his fiancée, and to him, she's the one he's supposed to protect. Bertia still refuses to accept it, insisting she isn't someone he should think of that way, but Cecil calmly shuts that down, making it clear that's his decision, not hers, only for her to push back again, worried that helping her would put him against the heroine, something she refuses to allow. And when Cecil points out that things could easily get worse, she pauses for a moment before stubbornly declaring she doesn't need anyone's help. And that single statement lands harder than anything else, quietly breaking whatever patience he had left, as he simply tells her to do as she wishes and steps away, using the excuse of losing his appetite to end the conversation. As he walks away, Cecil quietly questions himself, wondering why something so simple managed to get under his skin. But instead of chasing that answer, he chooses distance, and just like that, a month passes with him staying completely uninvolved, even though nothing around Bertia actually improves, until one peaceful moment in his office, with tea freshly served, is interrupted by a loud argument outside, where Bertia's followers are calling out Heroine for being the only one who hasn't submitted her school fair form, somehow turning basic paperwork into full-scale drama. Heroine immediately plays confused, insisting she never received anything, while Bertia's followers aren't buying it for a second and call her out directly, pointing out she's been reminded multiple times. But Heroine keeps up the act, slowly shifting from confusion to victim mode and subtly suggesting Bertia might be behind it, which only makes things worse as the others shut that down instantly, and just when the argument peaks, she breaks into tears, perfectly timed, drawing sympathy from her supporters who step in to comfort her like this entire situation somehow turned into her being the one wronged. From a distance, Cecil picks up on something immediately. The way those boys are reacting feels less like loyalty and more like they've been magically updated, which raises a very inconvenient possibility. And right on cue, Bertia steps in to restore order, only for Heroine to smoothly flip the entire situation and place the blame right back on her, while Silica and Cynthia shut that down without missing a beat, turning the scene into a perfectly organized chaos where accusations are flying, Logic is taking a break, and no one is remotely interested in backing down. Bertia suddenly cuts through the noise and steps forward, declaring she'll handle everything herself, even going as far as calling Heroine her prey like she's finally embracing the villainous role, only to immediately feel proud of how dramatic that sounded. But before the tension can actually build, the reaction takes a completely unexpected turn. Instead of being shocked, everyone starts praising her, calling her admirable and virtuous for facing everything head-on, turning what was meant to sound intimidating into something oddly inspiring, leaving Bertia standing there confused, and Heroine even more so. The situation somehow gets even worse, or better depending on who you ask, as the girls keep praising Bertia, turning everything she did into a lesson in kindness and self-control, while Bertia stands there trying to explain she didn't mean any of that. But no one is interested in listening anymore, and before long she's being treated like some perfect role model, which completely derails Heronia's plan and leaves her visibly frustrated, forcing her to walk away, while the admiration continues, except for one girl who quietly exits after noticing her boyfriend looking a little too impressed. Meanwhile, in an empty classroom, Heroine finally drops the sweet act and vents her frustration on Bertia's very unfortunate chair, stabbing it like it personally ruined her life, while Cecil observes from a distance and calmly connects the dots. And when Zeno suggests intervening, he even confirms the chair's identity with unnecessary accuracy, making the situation somehow worse. Yet despite knowing he could stop this instantly, he chooses not to, reminding himself that Bertia asked for no help, even if the chair clearly didn't. As Heroine leaves, Cecil casually drops a quiet warning, just enough to make her hurry off like she suddenly remembered something urgent, and only afterward does he realize it may have sounded far more threatening than intended, even though he's technically trying to stay out of it, reminding himself that Bertia wanted no help. Yet doing nothing turns out to be far more irritating than expected, so he settles for a compromise and tells Zeno to handle the very unfortunate chair, while Zeno, watching him walk away, quietly concludes that for someone not getting involved, he's remarkably involved. Late that evening, Cecil is quietly sitting in the council room when Sean bursts in, clearly fed up and skipping all formalities, asking him to step in, and Cecil, still composed, assumes it's just another one of Bertia's unpredictable moments, only for Sean to immediately correct him and bring up Heroine instead, explaining how her actions are hurting everyone, but Cecil remains firm, calmly saying Bertia chose to handle it herself, so he's simply respecting that decision, even if it's starting to feel like the hardest way to do absolutely nothing. Sean doesn't let it slide and goes straight to the point, making it clear Bertia isn't just a title or obligation. She's someone who actually matters to him, and Cecil tries to keep it composed, reducing it to duty while admitting he doesn't like seeing her hurt. But that only makes it worse, because Sean immediately questions why he's still standing back just because she refused his help. And for once, Cecil has no sharp reply, only the same excuse, that she rejected him, which sounds far less convincing the moment it's said out loud. Sean slows down just enough to ask the one question that actually hits, whether being pushed away by someone important leaves him feeling lonely. And for once Cecil has no immediate answer, the thought catching him off guard in a way he clearly wasn't prepared for. But before he can even process it, the door bursts open and Charles rushes in, completely out of breath, delivering the news about Bertia falling down the stairs, and in that instant, all of Cecil's calm composure disappears without a trace. After the shocking news of Bertia falling down the stairs, Cecil wastes no time heading straight to her room, and the moment he arrives, it's obvious the calm, composed prince is only barely holding together, while Bertia, despite being the one injured, somehow still greets him politely like she's welcoming a guest instead of causing nationwide concern. But Cecil skips every formality and immediately demands to know what happened, and as she explains things, casually mentioning that Fanil had been helping her earlier, Cecil silently stores the name away with terrifying speed, already preparing a future investigation for the unfortunate man whose only crime may have been standing nearby. Trying to keep things sounding casual, Bertia explains that she was returning to the student council room when another girl suddenly came up from behind and the two collided on the stairs. But the moment the story reaches the dangerous part, she abruptly changes direction and starts insisting she's perfectly fine because Kuro protected her, clearly attempting the classic strategy of distracting Cecil before he asks the real questions. Unfortunately for her, it fails instantly and Cecil calmly starts narrowing things down instead, asking about the girl's appearance until Bertia finally admits the student had pink blonde hair and a figure very similar to Heronia's, only to immediately force herself back into villainous mode and declare this is simply proof the story is progressing properly. Despite the fact that she's trembling so badly, even the performance itself looks terrified. Bertia's trembling finally destroys whatever patience Cecil had left, because no matter how hard she tries to act like this is all part of her perfect villainous plan, she's obviously terrified, and Cecil quietly realizes that seeing her hurt bothers him far more than it should. Like someone scratched something he considers his, and after holding himself back for this long, he finally gives up on staying uninvolved, takes her hands, and calmly declares that if she insists on acting freely, Then he'll start acting on his own will too, leaving Bertia completely frozen. Gathered in the council room, everyone immediately senses danger the moment Cecil calmly asks for assistance with a little personal revenge. And instead of being concerned, the entire group somehow becomes incredibly motivated, with Courtgain accepting like he's been waiting for this opportunity his whole life. Charles looking proud that their usually composed prince has finally entered his retaliation arc, Joanna quietly giving off the energy of someone ready to erase a bloodline for Bertia's. Sake, and Sean already attempting to skip directly to violence before the meeting has even properly begun. Cecil immediately shuts Sean down and reveals that Heroine isn't actually the mastermind, instantly stunning the entire room, before calmly laying out his reasoning, explaining that Heronia's usual style is ruining reputations from the shadows, not clumsy direct attacks that attract attention, meaning someone else has been pushing things further behind the scenes, and when the room demands the culprit's name, Cecil finally unveils Island Silberts, then smoothly follows it up by asking how they should prepare the dish, casually turning revenge into something that sounds dangerously close to fine dining. 1 week later in the Academy Garden, Heroine publicly confronts Bertia and immediately starts accusing her of staging the stair incident herself, confidently declaring that a villainess will always be a villainess, while acting like she just uncovered the greatest conspiracy in the kingdom. Meanwhile, Bertia stands there completely confused, looking far less like an evil mastermind and far more like someone who accidentally walked into the wrong conversation. Watching everything unfold from the side, Courtgain quietly asks if even this confrontation was part of Cecil's plan, only for Cecil to casually admit it's pure coincidence, just an extremely convenient one, because today already happens to be the day they plan to expose the real culprit, revealing that Island has been deliberately brought to the courtyard. And as he calmly explains the truth behind the stair incident, the entire situation suddenly becomes much pettier and much more ridiculous, since the whole chain of bullying started from Island's one-sided crush on Fanil and her jealousy over his admiration for Bertia, until eventually her emotions exploded at the worst possible moment and she shoved Bertia in a fit of rage, which Cecil summarizes with frightening calm while also making it very clear that attacking his fiancée was an exceptionally poor life decision. While Heroine keeps aggressively accusing Bertia in front of everyone, Cecil finally steps in and shuts the entire thing down with one sentence, calmly reminding everyone that Bertia is his fiancée and asking Heroine to stop throwing around baseless accusations, instantly throwing Heroine off balance, though she quickly tries to recover by using her charm magic and painting herself as the victim again, only for Cecil to realize with mild surprise that Bertia's protective magic is completely blocking the effect, making Heronia's greatest weapon fail so badly it almost becomes embarrassing. And with the entire courtyard now focused on him, Cecil smoothly takes control of the situation and publicly clarifies one important detail. Bertia never once claimed Heroine pushed her, leaving Heroine unintentionally agreeing with him in front of everyone. Cecil calmly points out that while Bertia mentioned seeing someone with hair similar to Heronia's, she never once directly accused her. And when Bertia quietly nods in agreement, the atmosphere instantly shifts, because despite constantly talking about becoming a perfect villainess, she still refuses to falsely blame someone when given the ideal chance, honestly making her spectacularly bad at being evil. And as Cecil explains that someone merely took advantage of the tension between the two girls, Island immediately starts panicking and tries to leave before the conversation somehow reaches her, only for Fanil to block her escape at the perfect moment, allowing Cecil to finally turn toward her and calmly expose the truth behind all the harassment. Terrified, Island immediately tries to throw the blame back onto Heroine, but by this point the student council has arrived with evidence, witnesses, and enough preparation to ruin her entire week, as Joanna calmly reveals they've been monitoring her movements for days, while Cynthia explains the suspicious disappearing act they kept witnessing, where Island would walk into a room and Heroine would somehow walk out instead, a strategy that probably sounded brilliant until multiple people started watching, and to finish things off, and confirms they personally saw the disguised culprit tampering with Bertia's belongings, leaving Island's defense collapsing faster than her confidence. Even after being cornered, Island still desperately clings to denial, arguing that everyone must have simply misunderstood what they saw and insisting the culprit still looked like Heroine in the end. But Cecil calmly accepts her excuse with suspicious ease before smoothly revealing they also prepared physical evidence, immediately calling Nelt forward, which unfortunately turns the poor boy into a nervous wreck the moment he realizes the entire courtyard is staring at him, though Silica quickly steps in to encourage him, reminding him to explain things the same way he always does with her, basically saving both Nelt and the audience from watching a live academic collapse. After calming himself down, Nelt begins explaining the experiment with absolute seriousness, proudly introducing 2 different solutions made from moss and medicinal herbs before slowly drifting into what was rapidly becoming a full chemistry lecture, complete with invisible substances and scientific reactions that probably only he understood, until Silica quickly cuts him off before the entire courtyard accidentally enrolls in advanced alchemy classes. Then smoothly explains the actual point, revealing they secretly sprayed the special solution around Bertia's personal storage closet over the past few days, while Cynthia adds that the area had already been cleaned beforehand, meaning only the real culprit could have stepped into it, causing several people in the crowd to suddenly look much more nervous than before. As the entire courtyard closes in around the culprit, Silica calmly requests Island's shoes while also asking for Heronia's pair to keep everything fair, and Heroine agrees immediately with the confidence of someone fully expecting a dramatic innocence reveal, while Joanna politely pressures Island into handing hers over as well, and once the test begins, Nelt first pours the solution onto Heronia's shoes only for absolutely nothing to happen, which Heroine reacts to like she just won a court case, but the moment the liquid touches Island's shoes, the color suddenly changes, instantly killing the atmosphere around her. And while the crowd falls silent, Cecil calmly admires how beautifully the evidence revealed itself before asking if she still had anything left to say, which honestly sounded less like a question and more like a funeral announcement for her excuses. Even after being exposed so thoroughly, Island still desperately claims the entire student council conspired to frame her. But that accusation finally snaps whatever patience Cecil had left, as he coldly points out how absurd it would be for the entire council to risk themselves just to protect Heroine for no reason. And for the first time, his anger becomes so obvious that even Charles is caught off guard by it, while Courtgain casually notes that this reaction is completely understandable, considering someone targeted Bertia, and after calming himself, Cecil almost mercifully dismisses Island's desperate excuses before casually mentioning that today just happens to be the dormitory cleaning day, meaning if someone were hiding evidence in their room, this would be the perfect moment to dispose of it, instantly causing the tension around Island to skyrocket again. Before Island can recover, Courtgain suddenly snatches the object she was desperately protecting, and the moment she panics and demands it back, everyone already knows she made a terrible mistake, because Courtgain calmly reveals the item hidden inside. A wig matching Heronia's hair color exactly, instantly exposing how she disguised herself to frame her all along, leaving Heroine completely stunned while Cecil quietly reminds Island that he already warned her not to take her little games too far. And with the truth finally exposed, it also becomes clear that the person violently stabbing Bertia's chair in the classroom was never Heroine, but Island herself, reducing the girl to a trembling mess on the ground, only for the final blow to arrive when Fanil openly declares that he despises her from the bottom of his heart before walking away, leaving Island completely shattered as she breaks down in front of everyone. With the entire incident finally resolved, Cecil calmly decides it's time to leave and take Bertia somewhere she can properly rest. But before they can go, Heroine suddenly grabs his hand and demands to know why he isn't comforting her instead, acting like the entire disaster somehow still made her the victim, only for Cecil to reject that idea with terrifyingly simple honesty and make it clear his concern is Bertia, not her, which finally causes Heroine to completely lose composure as she starts ranting about Bertia ruining the story itself, insisting she should behave like a proper villainess instead of interfering, before declaring that while the other capture targets don't matter, Cecil absolutely belongs with her because only she can bring him happiness, dramatically revealing herself as the Maiden of Destiny and leaving Bertia completely speechless. Heronia's dramatic declaration about being the Maiden of Destiny genuinely unsettles Cecil, making him wonder if some absurd force is truly trying to tie him to the heroine, while Heroine storms off after announcing the world exists for her happiness like she just finished performing on stage. And in the heavy silence left behind, Bertia quietly apologizes before suddenly collapsing unconscious, instantly throwing everyone into panic. Sitting beside the unconscious Bertia, Cecil quietly realizes he should have paid closer attention, especially after hearing she had been pretending everything was fine while secretly losing sleep ever since the stair incident. And for the first time he admits to himself that losing her would genuinely trouble him, because life without Bertia's chaos would be painfully boring. So when she finally wakes up and mistakes the situation for a dream, Cecil gently reassures her before calmly explaining that she collapsed from exhaustion and lack of sleep, then asks if he can let the others in, because at this point the entire student council is practically waiting outside like an overly emotional rescue squad. Hearing that everyone is waiting outside, Bertia immediately sits up and hurriedly fixes her hair like collapsing unconscious was somehow less embarrassing than looking messy, and the moment the student council enters the room, they completely overwhelm her with concern, as Joanna nearly tears up from worry while Silica instantly starts offering sleep tea, emotional support, and enough care to open a small clinic, leaving Bertia looking more confused by kindness than by the actual collapse itself. Cecil gently explains that everyone in the room is on her side and simply doesn't want her struggling alone anymore, with the entire student council immediately agreeing in perfect unison like a very emotional support squad. But after processing all that kindness with maximum confusion, Bertia proudly declares that she'll work her hardest to understand why everyone keeps trying to cheer her up, instantly stunning the room before making everyone burst into laughter. Cecil can only admit that understanding other people's kindness is probably a very worthwhile goal for Bertia to work toward, while quietly realizing once again that this cheerful chaos surrounding her is exactly how things should be. Because somehow, watching Tia turn every serious moment into something warm and ridiculous has become one of his favorite things. Roughly 2 months later, the Academy is thrown into excitement as Bertia proudly opens the long-awaited culture fair she proposed herself, while Sean enthusiastically delivers his declaration as student council president with all the seriousness of a tiny, overworked ruler addressing the kingdom. And as Cecil quietly watches the lively scene unfold, he admits to himself that today is meant for making memories and finding some amusement, only for Zeno to casually point out that the real entertainment isn't the festival itself but watching Bertia enjoy it. A statement so painfully accurate that Cecil immediately steps on his foot to silence him before he says anything even more dangerous. While enjoying the festival, Cecil unexpectedly runs into Joanna, who immediately admits she came to watch Sean's opening speech, though the way she almost called it adorable before correcting herself made her intentions painfully obvious. And after Cecil politely invites her to walk with him, the conversation quickly shifts back to Island, with Joanna revealing that the stair incident is now officially being treated as attempted murder, and that the judiciary has already stepped in, leaving Island locked away while her other crimes are investigated. A result Cecil calmly considers completely reasonable, proving once again that his version of mercy is terrifyingly efficient. As they walk through the festival together, Joanna honestly admits she once worried Bertia would eventually be hurt by Cecil's cold personality, but after seeing the way he acts around her now, she realizes those fears were completely unnecessary and even remarks that the current Cecil is far more charming than his old self, politely asking him to make Bertia happy, a request he accepts surprisingly seriously, before his attention shifts toward a nearby polling station where Joanna explains, tomorrow's closing event will decide the Academy's best couple, though Charles and Anne were tragically disqualified for being in the high school division, a loss that probably caused riots among their supporters, while Cecil quietly notes that the event is guaranteed to create complete chaos by tomorrow. While waiting in the Academy garden, Cecil is finally joined by Bertia rushing over in a panic after keeping him waiting, only for him to casually take her hand and admit he felt lonely not seeing her all day, then immediately make the situation worse by kissing her hand and calling her his darling Tia, nearly sending Bertia into system failure. But the moment he reveals he brought sweets from the culture fair, her attention shifts so fast it honestly becomes impressive, and as she happily eats beside him completely unaware of the danger, Cecil gently wipes cream from the corner of her mouth, while nearby students silently witness enough romantic evidence to guarantee the disaster waiting for her at tomorrow's best couple rankings. By the final evening of the culture fair, the Academy is practically vibrating with excitement as Bertia proudly steps onto the stage to announce the results of the best couple rankings, with the crowd erupting into cheers as third place is awarded to both Vault and Cynthia alongside Nelt and Silica, while second place goes to Sean and Joanna, a result that nearly exposes Joanna's happiness a little too openly, but the real disaster arrives when Bertia confidently announces the grand prize winners as Prince Cecil and herself, only for her brain to immediately stop functioning halfway through the sentence as she realizes the entire Academy apparently spent 2 straight days documenting their romantic behavior like highly trained investigators studying a rare species. While Bertia is still mentally collapsing on stage, Silica happily grabs the notes from her hands and continues reading the audience comments out loud, including one particularly devastating observation about Prince Cecil gently wiping cream from Bertia's mouth and creating such an unbearably sweet atmosphere that several students apparently considered it a cultural experience. And before Bertia can recover from that public humiliation, Cecil himself casually walks onto the stage after claiming he simply came because he was introduced, instantly throwing the crowd into even greater chaos while Bertia completely loses the ability to function, forcing Silica to desperately tell her to pull herself together. Meanwhile, Cecil calmly thanks everyone for choosing them as best couple and smoothly promises that the two of them will continue building a wonderful relationship together, casually delivering emotional damage to Bertia in front of the entire Academy. Before Bertia can even recover from the public embarrassment, Cecil suddenly lifts her into his arms and kisses her on the cheek right in front of the entire Academy, instantly leaving the crowd completely stunned while Bertia herself loses the ability to process reality altogether. And as Cecil notices her entire body turning bright red, he almost admits he finds the reaction entertaining before quickly correcting himself and deciding adorable is the more appropriate description. Then casually hands the rest of the ceremony over to Sean like he didn't just create the biggest scandal of the entire festival. Later, while the two quietly watched the fireworks together, Bertia finally complains that Cecil completely ruined her plans by turning what was supposed to be a few harmless memories before his future happy ending with the heroine into an unforgettable public disaster that she'll now remember forever. While Cecil, surprisingly sincere for once, softly apologizes and admits he was simply happy that the two of them were chosen as best couple together, before gently asking if she truly felt differently. Bertia reluctantly admits that despite all her complaining, being chosen together actually did make her happy, and hearing that quietly relieves Cecil, because beneath all the shameless public flirting and emotional damage he inflicted on her during the festival, his real intention had been to reassure both Bertia and everyone watching that their bond was genuine, while also chasing away the uneasiness she had been carrying lately. And as the fireworks light up the night sky, Cecil silently promises himself that no matter how chaotic the future becomes, he refuses to let their memories together turn into something painful, though judging from Bertia's permanently red face, the emotional recovery process may already be impossible.